Hi, I'm Michele Rattray Huish, a member of the Stewardship of the Environment Committee and of the SJAG of Christchurch Cathedral, which is the Ecological Social Justice Action Group of the Cathedral here in Montreal. And I'm also retired from the Convention on Biological Diversity, having worked with them for some 22 years, which is all a part of the United Nations Environment Program. Today I'd like to talk to you about the subject of the environment and how we as people mostly, but as Anglicans particularly, should be concerned and should know that this is a situation, that we're living in a situation where the environment is talked about broadly or behind the scenes, but it's not brought home to us, or we haven't internalized the dire danger that the world is in today, 2023. It's somehow still on the outskirts of our concerns, and that needs to change. As many of you may know, COP15 just took place here in Montreal in December. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties, and 15 means it's the 15th Conference of the Parties, and this is the Conference of the Parties for the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this took place here in Montreal because the Secretariat of the Convention happens to be in Montreal. In fact, that's where I worked for 22 years. And it's a very important international meeting. It didn't get as much, or it doesn't get as much coverage in the public eye as the climate change COPs, but it's equally, or I would even say more important than that, because it covers a much, much wider range than simply climate change. It really covers life on Earth. And COP15, it was 14 days. It was some intense negotiations. At the beginning, people were not very hopeful that we would get to a decision that all parties could sign on to. But at the last minute, on the night of the 15th night actually, they managed to sign the global framework, which is going to govern how governments protect biodiversity for the next 10 years. In fact, not even 10 years, up to 2030, so 7 years now. And this is it's international law, it's details, it's nitty-gritty, but at the same time it's wider because it covers all peoples, everybody, everywhere, living in every country and in every biosphere. And not only were government people there, but there were people from indigenous and local communities represented there. There were students there from every part. There were actually 188 separate countries represented at the COP, and people from all parts fighting to get their language into the final agreement to say, look, we achieved, this is what is going to happen, this is how we're going to save the Earth. One of the most encouraging things that happened at the COP, and what most of the parties were fighting to get, I say most of them, not all, was that we agree to something that's called 30 by 30, meaning that we as a world preserve 30% of lands, oceans, seas, inland waters by 2030. So 30 by 30, we protect the land and the oceans, 30% of it by 2030. So that's an accomplishment. That's something that many people didn't think would get signed off on, but it was at the last minute. On the other hand, there were people pushing for us to be protecting 50% of lands, oceans, seas by 2030. So how do we look at that? You know, a glass half full, half empty. For me, I think that we need to look at the fact that 30 by 30 is agreed, and countries will go home. Will have left Montreal and gone to their various capitals to try and put into place mechanisms for this to happen. On the other hand, and there's always another hand, what's not so encouraging is that they didn't come up with the mechanisms that were adopted at this COP. It means that really every country is going to do what it wants to do, and that can be catastrophic for certain peoples. You know, if the decision is taken that we're going to protect 30% of this land by kicking off the indigenous peoples from that land, then we have a problem, a very big problem, because it's acknowledged, it is acknowledged that the indigenous peoples of this world are the greatest protectors of land in the world. They do it the best. When we have indigenous peoples on the lands, the earth is protected much, much more than when we decide we're going to ring fence a certain amount of land and say, okay, this is a protected area. And so on the books it's protected, but when we look at it from an ecological perspective, not so much. Biodiversity is it's a complex issue, and protection of it is essential. If we are going to survive as humans here, how do we do it? That's the question. I certainly, from my perspective, I think that the more people that know about this, that know that there's danger, that know that there are issues to be solved, that can put pressure on politicians and people who make the big decisions, then the better chance we have that we will succeed. Because if politicians are not pushed by people like you and like me, nothing will happen, and we will just sink. Another success, you could look at it, at the COP was countries pledging funding to allow developing countries and poorer countries to be able to address on their own land the issues of climate change and destruction of biodiversity. We got pledges that of, I think it's $30 billion per year by 2030, 25 billion by 2025, going to developing countries to allow them to do the mitigation and adaptation that's needed for them, that will be needed for them to survive, so that way they don't have climate refugees or people running from places because of drought. 25 million by 2025, 30 billion. 25 billion by 2025, 30 billion by 2030. It sounds like a lot of money, until you realize that what parties were asking for at the COP was 100 billion a year. So the compromise that was agreed in this text was a third, but it's better than nothing. As Anglicans, we know that the fifth mark of mission of the Anglican Church of Canada is to strive to safeguard the integrity of creation and sustain and renew the life of the earth. So that's on you and on me. We are bound to be doing this. And how do we do this in our own lives? I mean, I know that when I talk to people, the reaction I get is, what can I do? I mean, there's nothing that I can do to change this. This is just how it is. And in many ways it is. But that is what we need to change. We need to have sufficient people change that feeling that they can't do anything in order to change the world. In You know that saying that a butterfly flaps his wings over somewhere and there's a tsunami over somewhere else? That's the kind of thing that needs to happen, the kind of movement for peoples to do something, get excited, get invested to save ourselves. Because yes, forever and ever people have been saying the sky's falling, and nothing, the sky hasn't fallen. But we're there now, actually. You know, we have changed the world so much in the last 50 years that the earth that we live on today is not the earth that certainly that I was born on, 60 years ago. It's not. So much has changed in terms of the acidity of the oceans, the temperature, the general temperature of the world, the melting of the ice caps. These are fundamental changes that are irreversible. Certainly in our time, and maybe another billion years, the ice caps will refreeze. But right now we're living on a different Earth than 50 years ago. And this time, yes, the Earth has changed, has always been changing. But this change, the one that we're living through, we brought this upon ourselves by pumping all of these fossil fuels into the atmosphere, heating up the world to the point where now everything is affected. Your crops, they cannot grow in a certain temperature. Even we as humans, we can't live, beyond a certain temperature, heat temperature. If the temperature of the air gets to a certain level, we can't, or we're biological creatures. We won't survive. The rivers are drying up. Can you imagine that the Yangtze River in China, one of the largest rivers in the world, dried up this year? Well, last year. It's incredible to think that. So we are making huge physical changes to the world, and we're doing it by heating up the world. Like we're a marble that's being heated, and now we need to say, okay, we've done huge damage, but it's not too late to stop doing the damage and to go back and try and fix some of the damage, and that's where we're at. We've done huge damage, and some of the damage is not fixable. We can't fix it anymore. But we can stop doing the damage and try and adapt, mitigate, roll back the things that are happening now. And that takes money, that takes effort, that takes intent, and that takes people being on the same page to say, yes, let's do it. Let's save this earth. And on top of that, it's one of the marks of missions for Anglicans. So we should be getting on board with that. What can we do? What can we do locally? What can we do in our own homes? We can support solar energy, wind energy, geothermal, anything other than fossil fuel. For biodiversity, we can support that pesticides are not used on our land, that lawns are not. We don't have lawns everywhere. We can do it on our church properties, so that we have places that biodiversity can grow, pollination can happen. There's so many things that we can do on a small scale that will help, but it takes all of us doing it on a small scale for it to make a difference.